Welcome back to the Hardware Unbox podcast. We are live from the Computex show floor. Well, not live by the time you listen to this podcast, but
we're alive.
We are alive here at the Antec booth, who have gladly, I guess, given us this like elevated platform area. If you're watching the video of this podcast, you'll see that there's quite a nice view of the show floor behind us. So shout out to Antec, who had this cool space for us to come and film a podcast. And yeah, this is pretty much the very final hour of the show floor days at Computex. We'll still be here for a couple of other days after this. So how you feeling, Steve? You've done a lot of crazy stuff at this show.
Well, right now I'm feeling pretty special up here. This is a nice spot.
Yeah.
I've got some sort of tea drink, I believe, that I've got out of the fridge there, so I'll start sipping on that in a moment. But an in-person podcast in Taiwan, Taipei for Computex. Pretty special edition, I reckon.
Yeah, it's awesome. So I guess before we get into the main topics, we're going to talk about the 5060, the review, how we did that here at Computex. We're going to talk obviously about 9060 XT as well. Outside of those things, have we seen anything like super interesting, super compelling at Computex this year?
As usual, there's always really cool cases, coolers. Really, every year they seem to make something interesting and different, so that's always good to see. The graphics card stuff, 9060 XT, seems to be pretty exciting based on what we've seen so far, but of course we've got to go test it and then ultimately see what pricing and availability looks like weeks and months after release. But that's all been good. I'm probably forgetting some other stuff, but yeah, there's always it's kind of like an overload of tech-related stuff. But yeah, there's stuff everywhere. Obviously, less announcements compared to, say, last year, but there's still just so much to see. There's two massive halls with two levels full of stuff. We certainly haven't seen it all.
Yeah, that's right. It kind of does feel like this year, at least for the consumer side of things, there isn't quite as much AI stuff this time around. Last year it was all, well, the badge does have AI on it. But yeah, like last time there was like AI SSDs, AI cases, AI power supplies. And while there's obviously still a ton of AI stuff, Asus, I think they had like massive screens showing AI and all that. It seems like they're largely focusing that more to the workstation / server / enterprise side of things. And the consumer side is much more about just normal stuff. So we don't have to worry too much about getting bombarded by nonsense AI garbage. So that's been, I guess, maybe a surprise. There's also been some really great monitors at the show this year, some really interesting new products that we'll be hoping to test. We'll have Simon from TFT Central to chat about monitors in person in a podcast that'll be coming up shortly. So stay tuned for all of our thoughts from two people that do test a lot of monitors. So that should be a nice, interesting discussion. But yeah, like the site, like hopefully if you're watching the video version, you'll get a sort of sense of some scale to Computex. It is a massive trade show. And there's just companies we've never heard of before that have massive booths talking about all sorts of interesting things. So it's always a nice time to just walk around, get the vibe, see what people are showing off. And yeah, it's been awesome. I love coming here and seeing this.
It's a good time for sure.
So the first thing I think a lot of people will be super interested about is we reviewed a graphics card at Computex.
First ever for us.
Yeah, so it wasn't, we actually heard some comments from people asking us whether we like faked that or anything. Like, did we secretly test it at home and then brought the results and pretended like we did it here?
That would have been a preferable option.
Did we lie about the test numbers? Like, no. In our hotel room, we tested the RTX 5060. So do you want to run through how that came about and how we did it?
Yeah, sure. How it came about is fairly straightforward. So obviously, NVIDIA, they announced the 5060. They said it was going to be coming later in May, didn't give us a date. Then eventually we did get a date. Turns out it was during Computex, but we had the cards in hand 2 weeks prior. So well, that's okay. A bit weird to release it during Computex, but we've got the cards now, so we'll get testing. I emailed NVIDIA asking for the driver. We'd actually been going back and forth with the conversation earlier in the day. And as soon as I asked about the driver, all communication ceased. So they went dark, no communication. And then I started hearing from other reviewers who I talked to, and some even posted publicly, that NVIDIA refused to release the driver, and therefore there wouldn't be an RTX 5060 review program. So it was at that point that I was like, okay, I've got the sample about 2 weeks ahead of time. We're going to be at Computex. The driver will be released on, it'll be the 20th for us, and it was the 20th or very late 19th.
Very late on the 19th.
Yeah. So We knew it'd be getting the drive, and I thought, can we squeeze this into our schedule? So we rescheduled a few things to free up my time. Tim did a bit of work on the day of the driver drop. And yeah, so basically I spoke with some of our partners. So MSI, for example, organised a test system PC for me, which was awesome. So AM5 system with basically the same configuration I have at home. All I had to do was bring a few things. All their 9800X 3D CPUs were tied up on the showroom floor. So I was like, look, it's easy, I can just bring mine. I brought my memory and of course my sample of the RTX 5060. So did that, got here, put it all in the system. There was a few hiccups, like we had to get the power cable, the 8-pin power cable, because they only had the 12 volt high powered cable. So got the power cable, had all that stuff ready to go. We tested it all out and then it was all set. We had all the games, they were all up to date. Everything was prepped and primed, ready to go, and we just needed the driver. So as soon as the driver became available, I pretty much locked myself in my hotel room and I spent about 5-6 hours testing to get it all done.
Yeah.
And then I just powered out a script. Like, look, it wasn't my best work, it wasn't my most in-depth review, but I think just getting the numbers out there, and that was really the focus. You know, we ignored power because I didn't bring all my power testing tools and overclocking, thermals, all that stuff. I'll look at the actual AIB cards themselves. We skipped over that, so it's probably like half of the normal review got deleted because really we just wanted to look at the numbers and see where it stacked up. And in the end, it was basically an 8GB 4060 Ti, which was an RTX 3070. So that's how that all came to be.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. I think it's just like, even here at the show floor, we've had questions from other medias, like how quickly you can do something like that. And it's really all about the preparation that you put in to like make sure all the games are ready to go, because if you're firing up a test system SSD for the first time in months and you've got to update a dozen games, then the hotel internet here is not bad, but that would still take a fair bit of time.
Yeah, it wouldn't happen.
So obviously that, and then all the comparative data was done ahead of time. So it's not like we brought a whole bunch of GPUs to Computex, then we were testing all of those at the same time. That was all locked and loaded. And yeah, that really simplified the process. So
I was already updating my data anyway because we knew the RTX 5060 and the 9060 XT series were coming. Yep. And I just updated a lot of the data for the 5060 Ti series, but we added a few new games to the test suite. So yeah, so I had about 2 weeks to get all of the numbers and everything worked out. So I did that all ahead of time. I had the 5060 in Excel, just had to populate those cells with the data. So really it didn't take too long. But it was a marathon sprint from start to finish. I was already quite tired, but we just had to get it done as quickly as possible because we actually had Computex trade show stuff we had to do. So as I said, I rescheduled things. Tim did his stuff on the day and the boys helped me with B-roll and all that. So they did all that stuff, which...
Nice results there, I would say. I think I did a good job.
It was unique. And yeah, that's how it all came together. So I wasn't very confident, I think it's fair to say, that I would get it done. Tim seemed much more confident that I'd pull it off than I was. But I was like, you know what, we're just going to give this thing a shot. We've done our best to make it happen, so hopefully it will. I was very, very tired by the end of it. I was blurry vision. You know when you get so tired, things start to move in slow motion?
Yeah.
That's where I was at the time the video was published. So anyway, great success in the end, I suppose.
Yeah, I would say so. And yeah, I think it was, just going back a moment, it was very interesting when we figured out that the launch would be on May 19th, because my initial thoughts were that date kind of made a bit of sense because we knew that the 9060 XT was going to be announced during Computex. So it would make sense that NVIDIA's competitive part, they'd want to get it out first by a couple of days so people were sort of hyped about the 5070 first. And if you're releasing it before Computex, that means that you would be able to test it the week before. So I was just thinking, that's a very normal sort of process. We're going to get drivers a week before. You'll be able to make your review. We'll fly out, publish the review maybe the day we get there. Maybe there'll be some finishing touches to put onto the review, but we should be able to get it done ahead of time so that people will be able to access that data once the reviews, once the product goes live. But it was really that review driver situation of we're not getting a driver where we went, oh, there's something else happening here. Like they put it into Computex because they didn't want us to review it.
And that was their plan.
At the end of the day, right, we're sitting here and we ended up getting a review out probably about 18 hours after they went on sale.
It made me much more determined to make it happen.
Yeah, exactly. So Yeah, I think that was a great success, and obviously the review's done really well. You've been really receptive to what's happened, and I think very understanding that a lot of the things you were talking about that we couldn't achieve here at Taipei, it makes sense. We won't be able to do power testing and stuff like that here at the show.
Yeah, the idea was just to really let you guys know from an actual independent review where it stacks up against other relevant GPUs. And it was a relief to me, I'll be honest, when other tech media, I think it was Guru 3D, they published a review not that long after mine, and they found the same thing. It's an RTX 3070 in most examples, which means it's a 4060 Ti. So it was good to get some validation for the results there. So didn't mess anything up. That's what it is. So that was good to see.
So what about the 5070 itself as a product? We've now reviewed and tested. You mentioned it's like 3070 sort of thing again, but the vibe I got from watching the review is that it's not as much of a disastrous, terrible product as the 5060 Ti 8GB. Like it's still an 8GB card. It's still $300 US. It's not advancing mainstream GPUs all that much, but it seemed like you weren't as upset or angry about this product as you were with the 5060 Ti.
Yes, that's accurate. So the reasons for that are, first of all, I don't think it's a great product because of the VRAM. I think it is holding back the progress of gaming. I think it is damaging the gaming industry at large, in my personal opinion. There are certainly people we spoke to, game developers and stuff, who agree with that opinion. So it's an opinion, whatever. That's what my feelings on it. But it's less egregious when compared to the 5060 Ti for a couple of reasons. First of all, it is cheaper. It's not a lot cheaper, but it is cheaper. And there's only one model. It's the 5060. So the 5060 is the 5060. There's no different variants. With the 5060 Ti, you have the 8GB model and the 16GB model. They're quite close in price, and it's just confusing for the consumer as to which one to buy. Is there even two to begin with? Because to be clear, the name is RTX 5060 Ti. It's not RTX 5060 Ti 8G or 8GB or 16GB. The name of the actual product is RTX 5060 Ti. So we've talked about this at length. I won't go over that for those of you who listen to the podcast and have heard previous episodes. But my biggest gripe was the naming with the 5060 Ti. I think the 16GB version is perfectly fine. Of course, I would like it to be more powerful and have offered gamers more, but look, it is what it is. I just have to accept that that's the performance, but I'm happy with everything else. And so those same train of thought applies to the 5060. I'd like the 5060 to be faster or as fast as a 4070, for example, but that's just not the reality. But the 8GB of VRAM does hold it back, does make it a product that I can't really recommend. And look, we've said in 2025, 8GB cards shouldn't be a thing. If they have to be a thing, have to be less than $200 US. $200 US at most, because I get that it is useful for a lot of people. Like, there are plenty of gamers that don't need more than 8GB of VRAM at this point in time. That may change. You may find yourself okay with 8GB in the games you play now. 2 years from now could be a different story. And we've already seen that 8GB graphics cards have depreciated much more significantly than the 16GB versions. So I think that's pretty much my feelings on that one. Makes sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, obviously the card should and would be better had it had more VRAM. And I think
even 12GB in it.
Yeah, I mean, the performance is pretty good.
The performance, I've got really, again, it would be nice if this generation offered more performance, but again, they're stuck on the same process node, so it is what it is there. We just, they can't work miracles, so I'm happy enough with the performance. And it's a reasonable performance uplift at the same price point. You're getting around 20% more performance just over that when compared to the 4060.
Yeah. I mean, it's much better than the 4060, which offered really no performance improvement and reduced the VRAM, but it was $30 US cheaper. This time around, they kept the VRAM the same, which is the real holdup, but then at least the performance has gone up a little bit. And yeah, we've seen comments of people being like, I really would have thought a 5060 would be faster than a 3070 by now, which I think is a very fair comment. Like, we should be further ahead. But if we're talking about the current landscape of what we're seeing in the GPU market and what, this has been a really poor GPU generation from NVIDIA. And we've seen the uplifts from products like a 5080, 5070 Ti being pretty disappointing. You would think based on that the lower end cards would have gotten screwed even harder, like they would just be refreshers or just not good releases. But if there is a saving grace from this series, it is that the 5060 gives a performance improvement. It's just the other issues. And yeah, we heard some interesting, obviously we're here at Computex, so we can talk to board partners about these situations, the products that are coming out, and what their thoughts are. And yeah, it was interesting to hear more from the product production side, things like how NVIDIA might have gone about deciding the 8 gigabytes of VRAM, why they stuck to that even today, even despite the strong evidence, and just theories about particularly the supply side of things. Like NVIDIA has to set in stone the amount of GPUs they order, but also the amount of memory they order, probably around a year in advance, especially when they're using something like GDDR7 memory. That's a brand new memory technology. NVIDIA's basically got 100% of the supply, so they have to go to the memory manufacturers and go, produce this much memory for our GPUs. And if they're doing that a year out, saying make X amount, then they make the GPUs, then it turns out, 8 gigabytes actually isn't sufficient anymore. Now we need to have either ordered more 3 gigabyte modules or ordered just more modules to clamshell the designs, and there's just not enough memory that they've ordered. They're kind of in a position where they're stuck to some degree. Now, I don't want to excuse NVIDIA here because they should have thought this out even a year ago, because a year ago there was strong evidence that this would be the case. So they should have known better. But if we're wondering about why right now they weren't able to adjust their plans to just make this a 16 gig model, just make it a 12 gigabyte model, yeah, the things that board partners were saying were things like, yeah, they just couldn't get enough modules.
Yeah, they'd end up with a lot of GPUs without memory to pair with them.
Yeah, that's right. So they order a certain number of 5060s to be made, and the corresponding number of 8 gigabyte module, or the 2 gigabyte modules to pair up so that you make enough 8 gigabyte cards. But then if you try and turn 8 gig cards into 16 gig cards, but you've only got a certain number of memory modules, then you're left with a whole bunch of GPU silicon that's not being utilized. And so potentially they have a chance to fix these GPUs with a super series, because then the supply of memory will be different. They'll be able to order more cards and fix it. But
that's one technical reason for why this has occurred. Of course, the main reason is, once again, money.
Absolutely.
So the 8 gigabyte cards were never really intended, which NVIDIA said in a roundabout way, they weren't intended for our audience. They knew the enthusiast sort of crowd that watch places like Hardware Unbox weren't going to want an 8 gigabyte card, or most of them weren't going to. Really what they wanted to do was leverage, as I said, the 5060 Ti name, because as I said, there's only one name. And then they wanted to offer system integrators, other partners, a cheaper card where they could make more margin on with only 8 gigabytes. So if you go buy a pre-built system or whatever it may be, it's advertised to have an RTX 5060 Ti, and it's not until you look at the fine print that you find out it's an 8 gigabyte model, and the vast majority of people buying those systems have no idea that there is an 8 or 16 gigabyte model or what that even means. It's just the graphics card. So that's the graphics card they wanted. They wanted a GeForce graphics card, and they can buy that one. So that's really what they're doing here. Like, it isn't a whoopsie, we messed up here. It's like, this was the plan all along.
That's right. They want to make sure that the system integrators can hit the prices that they want to hit. And so by being able to make a GPU that's $50 cheaper, that's $50 more in the pocket of either the AIBs if they're or the system integrators if they make the price the same, or just allows them to hit a lower price point. And these are all things that the system integrators and PC builders love. They can make the product cheaper while making the name of the GPU exactly the same.
That's right. So they could do that with a 5060, but it's a 5060 Ti. It's the special extra model. So you're not getting the base model in this system, you're getting the special Ti model.
Yeah, and even with the 5060, it allows them to, say, hit the $300 price point. That can be the cheapest model on offer from system integrators. But then NVIDIA, if they were to have made a 16 or 12 gigabyte model, it would have been more than $300. They would have essentially passed on the cost of the extra GDDR7 modules to the consumer. So it would have been a $330 to $350 card. And then again, we fall into the same issue. The system integrators then want a cheaper GPU to put into their systems. And so they'd be wanting that 8 gigabyte card anyway because it's a cheaper version. And yes, you could say NVIDIA should just eat the margins, make it the 16 gig model for the same price. But we know they absolutely will not be willing to do that. They want to maintain margins across the whole product stack. So the only way that it would happen was to make the card more expensive.
Yep, and there are a number of other reasons which we've already discussed on the podcast. We won't, again, go into all of that again, because if you've heard it, you've heard it. But there's some additional reasons for why these cards exist.
So yeah, let's move into talking about the RX 9060 XT, because this is a really interesting launch. There's some good stuff in here, and there's some really bad, disappointing stuff. And I think it's kind of like whiplash, right? Like we see the 16 gigabyte model priced at $350 US, and it's like, okay, promising signs. And then you hear about the 8 gigabyte model, which we were talking a lot about. They should just cancel or make dirt cheap or just do anything to not have that card exist.
Different name is fine.
Different name, whatever needs to be done to not make the 9060 XT's 8 gigabyte model. And obviously we pretty much had learnt a couple of weeks beforehand from the leaks, rumors and all that sort of thing that the 8 gigabyte card was coming. And then lo and behold, they've kind of, like we said in the announcement video, they've copied NVIDIA's homework here. They saw NVIDIA have two cards with the same name, a good card and a bad card, and they're like, interesting.
But they also saw the reception from media and gamers.
That's right.
And they saw that the 8 gigabyte card was extremely poorly received by pretty well everyone. You really have to scour the internet to find people defending it at this point in time. They're really running low on defenders, which says how bad it is, basically.
Yeah, and I think with with AMD, when we were talking to them about the 8 and 16 gig situation, used pretty much the same excuse playbook from NVIDIA. Like NVIDIA says things like, it's not designed for mainstream gaming audiences. It's not designed for, the mainstream PC building audiences, even though they still sell it to the DIY market, so it makes absolutely no sense. But they were giving excuses like, 8 gigabyte cards, they're so popular in China, they're so popular in South America, Brazil, where GPUs are expensive. People can't afford the 16 gigabyte model, so we've got to make an 8 gigabyte card and sell it to them. And things like, we're expecting to sell way more 16 gig cards and 8 gigabyte cards in regions like Europe and North America, where 16 gig is more popular, but we still need these 8 gigabyte cards. It's like, yeah, okay, like I get that you need to hit a lower price point in some regions and some configurations are more popular than others, but why do they have the same name? Like none of that makes any sense in terms of the naming side of things. Like Brazil could have dealt with a 9060 8 gigabyte, like non-XT model. Like that would have been totally fine for that market. Why is it called the 9060 XT 8 gigabyte and it's still being sold in China and stuff? Like it just makes no sense.
And again, the answer is, well, it's the same GPU, so therefore it's the same, which is not great. Money is the real answer. So again, AMD can chuck these things in, system integrate, or chuck them at system integrators, claim that it's a 9060 XT. They're going to play off the positive feedback that card gets or positive reviews, and it's the same thing as what NVIDIA's done. It's just they could have played this so much better.
It was avoidable.
It was so avoidable, and if they really do manage to offer what they're claiming to offer with the 16 gigabyte 9060 XT, that card is going to be a huge win. So if they do hit that MSRP, if availability is good, especially in like a couple of months from now, then that card is pretty much going to kill the 5060 series entirely, or at least anyone who does their research, there'd be no reason to buy a GeForce GPU. You just wouldn't need to do it. And there would be no negative sentiment, there'd be no negative feedback around that product, except there's going to be a lot, because 8 gigabytes is not enough and they're going to run into the same problems. And again, totally avoidable. They just had to watch the mistakes NVIDIA made and not make them. So I don't know, the whole thing's just...
It's bizarre. Like maybe they're keeping the 9060 name open for another product that's more of a cut down Navi 44. I'm sure that will exist because we are yet to see a cut down version of that GPU. But still, like, there's so many numbers and names that could have been implemented here to make it a much more distinct thing. And we were even talking before about like, even if their excuse is, okay, so the two GPUs are exactly the same outside of the memory configuration and they didn't want to change the name based on that, then just make a slight clock speed adjustment or something on the 8 gigabyte card to make it a different performance package, which isn't ideal because you probably wouldn't want to sacrifice 5 or 10% of performance even on the 8 gigabyte card for esports gamers, but you could still have come up with some reason, some configuration, And again, they had months to figure this out. Like, it's not like 8 gigabytes has become a problem overnight. So firstly, they should already have been primed to know that an 8 gigabyte card would be poorly received. But then on top of that, they had at least a month and a half after the launch of not the launch, but the announcement of the 5060 Ti's to change course, correct course, or do something there. Then there was the reviews, then there was the whole manipulation of what NVIDIA's done on the media side of things. And they had plenty of reasons to go in a different direction and change things. And I get that it's hard last minute, like these plans are set in motion a long time ago, but even something as simple as like delaying the 8 gigabyte model so that they can come up with a new strategy. So instead of launching both, like let's say it took time to rename them as 9060s or something, you just delay the 8 gig card, let that silicon, let that VRAM sit in a warehouse somewhere while they redo the packaging, speak to the partners again, and get the ball rolling on a better version of that
it's
product.
Certainly not impossible to fix that. So I was going to say, one of the things, circling back to the RTX 5060 for a minute, but also this ties in with the 9060 XT 8 gigabyte, is the people who were defending it were saying, look, if reviewers just test at 1080p with medium quality settings, these cards are fine, there's no problems with them. Sort of true, but also very short-sighted, and it's just shooting yourself in the foot, really, because I don't know why you're defending these companies going about selling you 8 gigabyte cards for so much money at this point in time. You're going to be keeping these cards for at least 2 years, realistically longer than that. I can't predict the future, but I can predict that 8 gigabyte GPUs are going to be horrible in 2 years' time. Like medium quality settings at 1080p may be a dream.
Forget all that stuff. Forget the future. Is it acceptable today for a $300 US graphics card to be a 1080p medium experience? I think that's where it starts and ends. $300 is not 1080p medium settings. That is the medium to low, which is the lower tier, at the lowest resolution, probably with upscaling enabled as well to hit that in some situations. That should be the cheapest the dirt cheap model, which I guess these days, I mean, we have heard that a 5050 is coming, so I mean, who knows about that? But that is what should be like the sub $200 product, is when you're getting into that 1080p medium experience. This should be 1080p Ultra at the very minimum, if not some sort of 1440p experience. So that is just, those opinions are pure cope in my opinion. We have never in the past expected the 60 class to be some sort of highly compromised 1080p experience. It's always been, like, it's not a powerful GPU. You're not going to be getting high refresh rate 1440p. You're not going to be doing 4K on it. You're not going to be doing super high performance ray tracing. That's always going to be out of the question on a 60 class card. But it's always been at least like 1080p 60 reasonable quality settings, like you're getting a good experience. And so if we're having to like manipulate the settings to make the card look good and really dial things back just because of one issue with it, I just don't think that's reasonable.
No, it's not. And again, if it had even 12 gigabytes of VRAM, it'd be so much more capable and you could do a lot more with it. Like, we've usually, historically, it's been the compute power that's really limited you. Of course, you can, max out textures and stuff, and that doesn't eat into your compute too much, but that's been the limitation. But now really with these cards, in a lot of instances, it's actually the VRAM that's the limitation. Yeah. And that's just unacceptable, especially again, when you've got 8 and 16 gigabyte models with the same name, and one of them is limited by the VRAM, and that's just not clear when you buy it, is really bad. But I mean, we've been hearing from RTX 3070 owners for a long time, like a lot of them, not just a couple of people, not a few things here and there. We've been hearing en masse from people who bought RTX 3070s, which was a really popular GPU, that they've got plenty of processing power. They're just heavily limited by VRAM in so many modern games. And as we've just found out, a 5060 is a 3070. It's at a discount, but it's many years, like almost 5 years later, and same problem.
So I mean, putting aside the VRAM thing for the moment, I do think AMD, it's kind of weird, right? Like, they've learned some lessons from what they've done in terms of like how NVIDIA's executed things, how the 9070 XT has gone. They've learned some things in terms of the pricing and positioning of the 16 gigabyte card, but then they've also learned some lessons the wrong way with the 8 gigabyte stuff. But at least when it comes to things like the price, the position of the 9060 XT and how they've been marketing it, they haven't, like, one of my concerns was, were they going to revert to poor pricing? Because the 9070 XT, right, was announced as $600, but is not really a $600 card. So my concern was what they would do then is just raise the MSRP of the 9060 XT to basically set that at the price people would genuinely be paying in the market so they could make more money. And yes, AMD, what we're hearing is they're probably going to be playing the game again, and by that we mean fake MSRP sort of thing, just let the market forces take over. There'll be a limited run of MSRP cards, other cards available at a higher price. But that's clearly a more successful and better strategy than launching at the wrong price, like a 7900 XT, and having to drastically lower that price later after the reception is so poor, gamers shun the card, and they get negative feedback. It seems like, at least speaking to a couple of partners, the 9060 XT might be a little different to the 9070 XT in how much price variation there would be. It seems like the range of prices that AMD was discussing with partners ahead of launch is more in the ballpark of the actual MSRP that they've announced, whereas with the 9070 XT, there was a lot of difference in price there between the pre-launch discussion and the final price. So that might mean that the pricing is a little bit more acceptable, but AIBs are going to be playing the game. If 9060 XT 16 gigabytes are super popular and flying off shelves, then there's going to be little to no incentive for them to offer them at $350, at least for the initial couple of months. And based on what AMD has shown, and we've been talking about them killing the 5060 series and stuff like that with this product, I expect that a $350 card with the performance of a 5060 Ti, at least that's what they're claiming, with 16 gigabytes of memory is going to be a very attractive product. I think people will be very interested in buying them, especially now that we're getting more FSR4 games. They've given sort of a roadmap of FSR4 technology into the future as well that I think looks very promising. And so all of that combined, I think, means that, I don't anticipate that it will be $350, unfortunately, in terms of real world pricing for a little bit. But it's going to mean that the initial reception isn't disastrous for them, like it would have been if it was $450 as an example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, unfortunately they are forced to play that game, aren't they?
It's kind of just the way it is.
Yeah, it's hard to hate on them too much for that because in a way, well, that's what Nvidia's doing. They can't go and price match Nvidia or get very close, and then there was a few different scenarios that could have played out. So you were thinking if they got very competitive with Nvidia, that Nvidia would all of a sudden start, finding supply, and that would change the dynamic there. And I think they've played it as best they could given the conditions. And really, it is the market that's deciding the prices now through, demand.
Yeah, and I think Nvidia, they have made a concerted effort to bring pricing back down to where it should be. And this does not generally apply in the United States, but outside of that, their pricing has been. They're trying to hit the MSRP. They are doing a job there to get it to that position. And AMD's been a little bit slower. But again, one of the big sentiments from the show floor, speaking to people, is just how popular the 9070 XT is. Every AIB is basically like, we need our allocation of these cards to be much higher than it is. And if it was, we would still be selling all of those out easily. And that's just something that, you wouldn't have said about previous RDNA generations. Like it was much more difficult for these partners to sell these models. You're hearing about, some financial implications that has caused them in the past. And now it's like completely flipped. Like they just can't get enough of them into the door to actually make them.
Yeah, and on that note, we have heard though, that supply will be ramping up, and towards, it estimated the time when the Super Series arrives from Nvidia, that AMD will have the supply thing under control and there'll be a lot of cards. And I suspect that's when you'll see those MSRPs finally honored. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we were hearing like late Q3 to Q4 at some point when production will be ramping up a lot more for these models to give a more concrete timeline on when we're expecting that, which is not a very concrete timeline, but it's like not immediately, but there are expectations from partners that these things will be ramping up more.
Yep. So if you want one, but you don't want to pay above MSRP, possibly some good news there that towards the end of the year you'll actually be able to do that finally.
And yeah, like the presentation and stuff, it was very, very interesting because AMD had clearly heard the feedback, the sentiment around how 5060 reviews were handled. And so they were extremely transparent and on the record transparent, allowing us to tell you about how the review programs and stuff would work. So for example, right now we have one over there, a 9060 XT model ready to go. We have one in our hands.
16 gigabyte.
16 gigabyte model. AMD will not be restricting 8 gigabyte models at all, so we will be able to get an 8 gigabyte card. I don't think they will be doing a wide sampling program. They'll be preferring the 16 gig card, but if any media want an 8 gigabyte model, they will be trying their best to enable that. They say
I'll be
it should be
asking
possible.
for one. As soon as this podcast ends, I'll be shooting off some emails. So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, if you don't remember what we were saying previously, the 5060 Ti 8 gigabyte, NVIDIA actively prevented AIBs from sending that card until I think they continued to prevent them even after launch, but basically they were like, do not send this card out pre-launch.
There was no samples to be sent and there was none sent. You had to get it through a retailer and they were delayed to the retailers as well. I think I got mine about 4 or 5 days after the reviews went live. Now, AMD's saying this. To be clear, we don't have an 8 gigabyte card yet. So I've been sampled 4 cards that I know of, all are 16 gigabytes. So I will be directly requesting 8 gigabyte cards now that I've got a bit of a time to collect myself after all the stuff we've been doing. And I'll see if I can get one next week, which would give me time to get it done for the review the following week. If I don't have one in time for the review, it'll mean that they weren't super keen on sampling them, and while they said they were going to, they just did an NVIDIA and basically said the opposite to what the truth was. So yeah, we're gonna have to see.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how that will play out. We can only basically report what they're saying. And this is keeping AMD honest. Like, we are reporting now that they're saying 8 gigabyte cards will be able to be reviewed. So if they don't hold that to that promise, then it's not like it'll be a surprise. Well, it will be a surprise, basically. We'll be able to call them out for basically changing their word on this.
Yes, they lied, if that's the case.
Yeah, but again, like, it wasn't just about the 8 gigabyte sampling of 8 gigabyte cards. They made it very clear that reviewers will be able to review any of the models with drivers starting from Monday of next week. So I don't know when this podcast will go out, but basically the Monday after Computex ends, drivers will be available, and that should give reviewers around a week and a half to test the card, which is better than the negative days that NVIDIA gave because you had cards and then you couldn't test it at all until the launch. So yeah, they were very open about that. They're like, we're not interested in preventing these reviews. There was some talk about how, you know, maybe the landscape has shifted there, but that's apparently very much not the case. And AMD is willing to support the review programs for this in the way that they should be doing for these models. So, you know, it's kind of one of those situations where, you know, NVIDIA does a bad thing, it gets widely reported, and then that not only is bad just on the face value of it, but it creates ammunition for their direct competitor to then basically make fun of them about that situation and, you know, directly start commenting on it. So I found that very interesting because, you know, we very rarely are able to talk about the specific review timelines and things on the record. That's usually stuff companies don't like us sharing. It's more of like the behind the scenes NDA type stuff. But this time around, they're like, all good, guys. So there's that. But yeah, I'm pretty interested to see how this goes because it feels like it's been a few generations now of fairly weak mid to entry level GPUs. And based on what AMD is saying, this model looks somewhat compelling. So we'll have to see how that goes, obviously, with testing. But the initial impressions are better than any, like, it's been a while since I've come away from a launch like this and gone, okay, like, there might be something here for people who desperately want a card in that price range. So that'll pretty much do it for this podcast episode. As you might realize, it is a shorter episode, but the Computex trade show, we're filming this right at the end of the day. Antec is closing up their booth here, so shout out to Antec who allowed us to film this podcast and video here. But yeah, Computex is basically ending for the day. So we got to get out of here. That's just our brief, quick thoughts on the new products that have come out, 5060 that we've tested, 9060 XT from AMD and all that sort of thing. So yeah, there'll be more podcast content from Computex that'll be right here on the podcast channel and in your audio feeds as well for people to listen to, a couple of interesting interviews and stuff like that. But we will be back eventually in our normal office sort of setup for more in-depth discussions on these things, especially because we're in a preview phase right now. Like, we don't actually know how these cards perform, and our bread and butter is the review stuff. So once the 9060 XTs are fully tested, we'll be back talking.
I'm looking very forward to doing a review in my office.
Yeah, that would be awesome. So again, shout out to Antec for allowing us to film here. It's been a great location, nice and quiet, nice and peaceful. So that was good. And yeah, if you want to check out we've got the Patreon feed for people with extra bonuses and stuff like that. But yeah, until the next one, thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.